Welcome to Module 3, Lesson 4, Multiplying Rational Numbers. Today we're going to talk about multiplying rational numbers, applying properties of operations as strategies to multiply rational numbers, and solving real-world problems that involve multiplying rational numbers. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started here. Alright, so first we're going to take a look at what happens when you're multiplying. We took a look at this before. We talked about how when you're multiplying a positive and a negative, how it works out, how the sign of your answer works out. So in this case, Gina hiked down a canyon and stopped each time she descended half of a mile to rest. Okay, so in this case, descended would be an important word. Half a mile. She hiked a total of 4 sections, and we want to know what was her overall change in elevation. Okay, so what this tells me is that, I'm going to get my black pen here. So we have to represent the change in elevation using a negative because she descended. So that's why this is negative 1/2. And then she did that 4 times. So we have 4 times negative 1/2. Now you can also write it when you just have the parenthesis connected to the number like this. That means 4 times negative 1/2. Okay, so let's look at it this way. So she started at 0. Okay, 0 is her starting point. And then she hiked down, so to the left, half a mile. And then she stopped. And then one more time she went another half a mile. And then she stopped. And then half a mile and stopped, half a mile and stopped. So that tells us that she went down 2 miles. So I know it seems weird that 4 times half, negative half, gives us a negative 2, but look at what's happening. You're taking those negative half a section, so negative half, and then another negative half gets you to that 1, and then 2 more negative halves are going to get you to that negative 2. Okay, so then in this case, 4 times that negative half should give us a negative 2 miles. Mathematically, like if we're not using a number line and we're just doing the 4 times negative 1/2, remember it's going to look like this. So you're going to take your 4, because it's a whole number, and put it over 1 times negative 1/2. Okay, and because it's multiplication, we can just multiply straight across. Now, we can do 2 things here. We can multiply straight across, and we can get 4/2, and we know it's negative because the positive and a negative gives me a negative. That's a negative sign there. And then I know that negative 4 divided by 2 gives me negative 2. Or, and I'm going to kind of scratch this out here so you can see you can pay attention to what I'm looking at. If I did, so 4 times the negative 1/2, I would still put 4/1 times negative 1/2. Now what I can do is I can look at my diagonals. So my diagonals here would be 4, and I will turn those into different colors. So, 4 and 2. And then my other diagonals are 1 and 1. So I'm going to look at 4 and 2. Well, 4 and 2 can be divided by 2. So if I divide each of these by 2, 2 divided by 2 is 1, and 4 divided by 2 is 2. So now I can multiply straight across, okay? And obviously 1 and 1, I don't need to simplify that any further. Now when I multiply straight across, I get 2 times 1 being 2, and 1 times 1 being 1. So I get negative 2/1, which I automatically know gives me negative 2. So I don't have to do this simplification part here. Okay, it's already simplified. Okay, so then let's take a look at this one. So on the number line, we're going to find 2 times negative 3.5. So this tells us how many times. I'm sorry, my pen is acting up here. There we go. And this one tells me how far. Okay, so 2 times we're going to go negative 3.5. So we're going to start at 0 and we're going to go to the left, negative 3, or we're going to go to the left, 3.5. So that's 1. And then we're going to go one more time. So this is 1, 2, 3. So that's 3. And then another half. That's going to give us negative 7. Okay, so that's how we use the number line. But then remember, if I'm going to do 2 times negative 3.5, with multiplication, it doesn't matter which one goes on top. So since 3.5 is the longer number because it has more digits, I don't have to line up the decimal, okay? I multiply and I ignore the decimal. I get 5 times 2 is 0, carry the 1. 3 times 2 is 6, plus 1 is 7. Remember, I have one number after the decimal, so I move my decimal 1 space to the left. So my answer is 7, and that's a decimal, not a comma. Okay, and then because the negative or the 3.5 was negative, I know that my answer should be negative 7. Okay, so now we're going to look at what happens when we do a negative times a negative. So the idea is the same. So now I'm going, so how many times? Twice. How far? Negative 3.5. So at first, I'm just going to do it like the 2 isn't negative. So I'm going to go 2 spaces to the left, the 3.5. So 1, 2, and that gets me to this negative 7. But now remember, this negative 2 tells me that I want the opposite. I want the opposite of whatever that answer is. Okay, so this shows me that 2 positive groups of negative 3.5 gives me a negative 7. So the opposite of that means, so 2 negative groups or 2 opposite groups of that should give me a positive 7. Okay, so it would end here. So this would be 2 positive groups. So then 2 negative groups would be the opposite. So then this is 7 away from 0, so I would go 7 away from 0 and see that my answer is a positive 7. Okay, so let's take a look at this on the number line. So I want negative 3 times negative 1 and 25/100ths. Okay, so on the number line, I'm going to go 1 and 25/100ths. So, and I'm going to do it 3 times. So 1 gets me to 1 and 25/100ths. 2 gets me to 2.5. And then 3 gets me to 3, gets me to 3 and 75/100ths. But now, this would be 3 positive groups. I want 3 negative groups. So since this is 3 and 75/100ths away from 0, I want the opposite of that, which would be a positive 3 and 75/100ths away from 0. So then to check my answer, again, I can just use our simple math. We can do 1 and 25/100ths and multiply it by 3, so we're ignoring the signs. 5 times 3 is 15, carry the 1. 2 times 3 is 6, plus 1 is 7. 1 times 3 is 3. I have 2 numbers after the decimal, so I swing my decimal twice to the left. So my answer is 3 and 75/100ths. And since both were negative, I know my answer should be positive. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to let you just take a look at this example and understand that when we multiply, we do 2 at a time. So we multiply these 2, we get an answer. Multiply those 2, we get an answer. Okay? I'm a firm believer with these fractions that you really need to take your time and practice it. So since there are quite a few, wrong direction, I apologize. There are quite a few problems here. So I'm going to show you how to do number 4. All right, so before you go and do anything, I'm going to show you how to do number 4. So you have negative 3/4 times negative 4/7 times negative 2/3. Well, now remember, we've talked about this. When there are 3 negatives, you know your answer should be negative because these two will cancel each other out and the other one makes the whole answer negative. So now again, what we can do is we can start by just doing these two. Well, 4 and 4 are both divisible by 4, so 4 divided by 4 is 1, 3 divided by 4 is 1, 3 and 7 only have 1 as a common factor, so I do 3 times 1 is 3, 1 times 7 is 7, negative and negative gives me a positive, but I still have negative 2/3 to multiply on the bottom. Here I have 3 and 3, they're both divisible by 3, and I get 1. 2 times 1 is 2, 7 times 1 is 7, and then I get negative because a negative and a positive give me a negative. So I should get negative 2/7 as my answer. Now what I could do is I could have done the negative 3/4 times the negative 4/7 times the negative 2/3, and I could have done it without the cross simplification, so I could have gotten 12 over 28 and then multiplied that by 2/3, but that's going to give me like 28 times 3, that's going to give me a pretty large number, so that's why we try to simplify right off the bat. So you could have simplified right away and said, oh, they're both divisible by 4 and gotten 3 over 7, which is what we got here, and then multiplied that by the 2/3, and that would have still given you, so this would have given us 6/21, both of which are divisible by 3, which would have given you 2 over 7, and we know that because it's a positive and a negative, my answer would have been negative. So again, you can do the simplification right away, which makes it a little bit easier, but takes a little practice, or you could simplify at the end, but your numbers will get pretty large. Okay, so at this point, you can either choose to go through number 5 with me and practice again, or you can practice it on your own and then come back and check your answer. Either way, I have to erase what's here, so go ahead and if you're going to, pause now. All right, so for negative 2/3, so negative 2/3 times negative 3/4 times 4/5, and I'm going to use the cross simplification. I want us to get used to that. I know negative and negative gives me a positive. Since there's 2 negatives, I know my answer is going to be positive. So my answer here was negative 2/7. My answer here should be positive. All right, and then here 3 and 3 so 3 divided by 3 and 3 divided by 3. Here 2 and 4 can both be divided by 2, so I get 1 and 2. 1 times 1 is 1. 1 times 2 is 2. And I know that negative times a negative gives me a positive. So I have positive 1/2 times 4/5. 2 and 4 are both divisible by 2, so I get 1 and 2. And I get 2/5 as an answer. Okay, at this point, what I would like you to do is I absolutely want you to try number 6 on your own and then come back and check your answers. Remember, it's okay to make mistakes. What you need to do, though, is you need to identify where those mistakes are before just erasing and fixing. All right, number 6. I'm actually going to do it in a different color so I don't have to erase. I have 2/3 times negative 9/10 times 5/6. All right, so I have 9 and 3 are both divisible by 3. I get 1 and 3. 10 and 2 are both divisible by 2, so I get 1 and 5. So 1 times 3 is 3. 1 times 5 is 5. This is the negative and a positive, so my answer is negative. Okay, and since there's only one negative here, I know my answer should be negative. I should have checked that first. And now I have negative 3/5 times a positive 5/6. 5 and 5 are both divisible by 5. 3 and 6 are both divisible by 3. Here I get 1. Here I get 2. 1 times 1 is 1. 1 times 2 is 2. And my answer is negative because I have a negative times a positive. So my answer is negative 1/2. Okay, so you have quite a few problems here that I would like you to try. Right? So if you look at number 11, it's basically showing you that, okay, it wants you to do this first. What do you get? And then what do you get as your answer? Okay, make sure, I would definitely say have a separate sheet of paper so you can show your work and so you can make sure that you got the correct answer. All right, and as always, if you have any questions, please be sure to email me or write them down so we can go over them in class.